You have the talent, you have to also.
I don't want to belong to that club even though I am. I said, why? I said, we're only talking amongst ourselves. I said, who is we? He said, we, the Jewish student. I said, where did you go to school? She said, I went to school in Toronto. Where do your parents live? Bathurst and Avenue, whatever, that area, that area. I said, okay. So I went to Jewish school. I said, fine, so what's the problem? He said, but I said, this is her background speaking now. She came born in Russia, moved to Israel, where she was with all sorts of people. Israel is a very multicultural society, even though it's a Jewish state. And now she is here in Canada, a young lady in her early 20s, very sensitive and affair and extremely intelligent, and she's telling me that I don't want to talk and be around them because I'm only hanging around with Jewish kids and they only talk about Jewish things, and I want to meet others and I want to experience others and I want to have other identity, I want to learn other history, and on and on. So we discussed these things, and here's the conclusion I come to, because again it's a matter of time, because I have another story to tell you. The conclusion is the level of insularity among our Jewish kids. Not my Jewish kid, among ours, okay? And for me, it's the student. The level of insularity, and I see that played out in the dynamics in the classroom, in the halls, in symposiums, and in events. There is a sense of being isolated, there's a sense of being intimidated, there's a sense of fear. When I was in the university, which was now donkeys years ago, one of my first experiences that I realized how old I have become, I hate to think about that, though I'm not yet reached the retirement age, is when a few years ago, and I was sharing this with my friend, I asked my undergraduate students, how many of you remember Pierre Trudeau? And they looked engaged at my face, and then I realized they were all born after Pierre Trudeau had left, and so they have no memory of Pierre Trudeau, okay? So when I was at Toronto, and did my studies over here, the environment was different. I'm talking about early 80s. And I remember that those of us, me, a Muslim, those of us who were on political ground, and most of us were on the left, I want to know, Noam Chomsky has still remained stuck on the left, that's why he stinks. We mature, we grow up, we move forward, we look at the world, we take an empirical evidence, and we then decide where we are. That's science, So, in the 1980s, those of us who talked about solidarity with the Palestinian issue, some of us cheered Ayatollah Khomeini and that revolution, and I was among them. And as I was telling Marina, I went in 1995 to Iran, not because at that time I was cheering Ayatollah Khomeini. By that time, the smell in my nose was too great. But I went out of curiosity, and I did meet some of these people, and Rafsanjani was the president. So we grow up, we mature, the world changes. 80s was a different time. And the world has changed dramatically. And we haven't caught up with it. And on the Jewish issue, since you asked me to talk about anti-Semitism, the world has changed on its axis. What was whispered then, and the memory of Holocaust was palpable. I could go into class in my seminar, as a graduate student, and listen to professors who could say that, either they had the first-hand experience of what had happened in Europe, or, their parents were there. And now, that experience is not there. That discussion is not there. Those who have the memory, they're all in the 80s, We have a liberal MP that can say, why is Jason Kenney in Auschwitz on this memorial? So that memory is gone away. World has shifted. What was whispered is now an open discussion. And anti-Semitism is no longer in the closet. Okay? And Jewish students in the campuses do not know how to deal with it. And that's where they are intimidated. And I don't know how much time I have. Do I have a few more time? Okay. Keep talking. You raise your hand up. Because if you let the professors talk, they'll talk you out to the, to the lake. You see, the problem is that if you're only going to be talking amongst yourselves and talking with yourselves, you are not going to make a dent in the way that the world has shifted. And we have to figure out how to do this. You can see that in our political arena. You can see where our political parties have moved. In the 1970s, I came to Canada in 1973, when I was just barely out of my teenage years, out of a very difficult circumstances which I don't want to get into. But I remember that David Lewis was there, and then it was followed by Stephen Lewis. I'm talking about the NDP. And I remember where the NDP, the left, was at that time, and of course where the Liberal Party was. And now, in that period that has come along, 25 or 30 years later, they have all shifted in a certain direction. Why? Because the demography has changed. The classroom demography has changed. The demography in the city has changed. The demography in the population has changed. We are no longer the same country that I came to in 1973. My son was born here. My mother is buried here in this city. I am a Canadian. I'm not a hyphenated Canadian. And we don't know how to deal with this shift and what has happened. In the international arena, the shift is even more dramatic. So I'll tell you the second story. I'll tell you the story recently. And students are the most remarkable because they are at that moment in time when they are students, and all of us have been students, that one can shed all the other arguments and try to look at the issues that you're studying and try to be focused on that issue and try to, imagine it and think about it. So I have this student. He's a mature student. He came about 3 years ago from Pakistan. Again, I won't mention names, but I'll call him by the pseudonym Ahmad, since everybody's an Ahmad or a Muhammad. So Ahmad, okay? So Ahmad is a mature student. He came here from northern area of Pakistan, which I know, I've traveled in that area. This is where the roof of the world is, the mountains, borders of Kashmir and China and so on and so forth. He had served in the government. He then went on a scholarship to Columbia, and he did his graduate studies in history in Columbia. And then, for some reason, a lot of it has to do with personal, they moved to Canada. He moved to Canada with his family. And now he comes to the university and he wants to do a PhD. He got a Columbia graduate degree and he wants to do a PhD. But our people, the bureaucracy tells him that, no, you've got to go and be a special student and take special courses. He finds me and he comes to me and he spends time with me. I'm at the beginning leery about talking with Pakistanis and all that, given what is happening in that part of the world, And those of us who come from that part of the world who have a sense of the history know how terrible the situation is. But I do engage with him because a request is made by the faculty chair, and so I spend some time with him. In the meantime, I spend time with him and we become friends. This man, he's not a young man, but this man comes from a religious background in Pakistan that is a minority. He's a Muslim, but he comes from a minority sect, the Shiites. In Pakistan, they are the minority. In northern area, where now the Taliban has totally infested the area and has taken over basically at the ground level. All right. He wants to do a PhD on the origin and rise of the Taliban. And ironically, I will have to chair his committee because there are not too many of us in the university who have that background. So I am discussing with him and talking with him and so on and so forth. He has to take special courses. And I say to him, why don't you broaden your understanding? Go and take some courses outside of the issue that you're going to do your PhD so that you'll have a comparative basis. And I encourage him, and he picks up on my word. Because he has been to Columbia, and he has studied in Columbia, and he had that exposure. And in Pakistan, as a civil servant, he was working with World Bank and other aid agencies. So he has that, at least that drive in it. So he goes. And lo and behold, he signs up for a course on Jewish history and Zionism. And so now, for the last 6 months, I'm talking about Jewish history and Zionism with a guy who's coming from northern area of Pakistan. If I name you the place and, city, it wouldn't mean anything to you. It would be at the other side of the moon. Okay? But I have traveled there and I know how the situation is in that part of the world. And here is this man now doing a course on Jewish history and Zionism. And he's giving a comment talking. And the other day he was talking to me about Theodor Herzl. And he was then talking about Zionism. And he said, Pakistan is like a Zionist state. There's only two countries that was created on the basis of religious demand. One was Pakistan, the breakup of India in 1947, thanks to, the British. And now we have all the problem and the Canadian soldiers dying in Afghanistan.